Welcome to Bridging Generations in Sales and Outreach. This is where experienced pros level up. My name's Butch Nicholson. I'm the host of the show. And I want to thank Fist Bump, who are our sponsors today. They also market, promote, and produce the podcast for us. So again, thanks to Fist Bump. Today, we're going to talk about something that is important to everyone, and it's especially important to seasoned business owners, and that is time. Because anytime you waste, any time that goes by, you're never going to get it back. That's one resource that never regenerates itself. I'm going to tell you how I met our guest today. I have a good friend, Dean Notley. And when I was going to start my show, Dean said, there are two people you've got to get on your show. One is Mark McKenzie, and the other was Richard Kirby. He said, between those two people, they know everybody. And I believe Dean was right. And it's been a pleasure to meet Richard. And I am very pleased to have him on the show today. So, Richard, would you just give us a little background, a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to chat with you today, Butch. I have 25 years in corporate management and 20 plus years coaching individuals, executives, and business owners. And how I got here was a roundabout route because nobody told me how to get here. I searched on my own, and I have an engineering degree, ended up moving eventually into training and development in an HR department at a company headquarters for AT&T, moved out of AT&T and got into some entrepreneurial activities and management and ended up in marketing, and then eventually in sales. So the last half of my corporate career was in sales. In 2001, I was making the most money I'd ever made in my life, and a recession hit, and I was expendable, like everybody is, potentially in a large corporation. So I decided to go out on my own. So 2002, I started coaching and been here ever since. And it's really a great opportunity to help business owners the last 10 or so years to be more successful.
I haven't met many people who are successful dealing with sales in our age that started in engineering. So that's definitely a differentiator for you.
I might be the only one.
So, Richard, one of the things I have over 45 years in sales. And one of the things that's always bothered me a bit is, and this has been true for that whole 45 years, it's almost like sales and marketing compete with each other. And if there's any problem in sales, they blame marketing. And if there's any problem in sales, marketing blames sales. And those two groups should be working together. I know part of what you do is help business owners handle that conundrum. So tell us a little bit about that as we get started.
Well, I've been in the corporate environment before where I was in that exact situation. And what I do view over time, as I've learned as I have seen good marketing and not just the generic vanilla marketing, which many of us encounter, is good marketing gets strategic on who is the customer and how do you get to that customer. And then once you have touched them and begun to create interest, how do you actually qualify so your salespeople don't just have leads, they have qualified leads. So I think one of the big controversies between sales and marketing has been sales always feels like marketing is just generating numbers like leads that are unqualified, and they're frankly wasting sales time trying to go through those. So I've been fortunate to have friends that are marketing resources. And one of my roles as a business coach is to connect people to functional, capable lead generation and metrics measuring marketing resources. And I think that's the key to having better sales is you can't do it all yourself in the sales department. Marketing can help fuel that.
Give our listeners some tips, I guess, for how you do that. Tell us a little bit more about how you do that.
Well, as I say, fortunately, I have resources, and I look myself as a generalist, as the business coach. I coach typically businesses that are under $10 million and are owned by single or dual partners. And you know, to not, I don't want to take any more credit than I can. Really, what I do is I engage them with marketing people who do what I just said. And when they come back and say, this is really great, we're getting a lot more qualified leads and we're able to close them faster because they're more clearly a match for the type customers we're looking for, then I'm the hero. But frankly, I don't have to do the heavy lifting. And that, in a way, I could tie that back to our topic today, Butch, is a lot of business owners are doing a lot of things that they're not expert in, and their time is being absorbed. Some business owners have said they're in the weeds, so to speak. They're down in the weeds. I got to get out of the weeds. And so they're doing the thing that they should outsource to a marketing company in this specific example, or delegate to an employee who is either capable of doing it now or could do it with a little bit of training.
Yeah, I understand that, Richard. The number one objection that with what we do at Fist Bump, the number one objection I get every single time is I don't have time.
Yeah, and I think that's true of most business owners who are in touch with reality of what's going on in their business. Sometimes that's because they're working 50, 60 or more hours a week and they feel exhausted. So, you know, as my late wife used to say, the universe is trying to tell you something. In other words, it's knocking on the door saying, you're working too hard for you're getting out of your business. Maybe you need to do something else. And those people who get in touch with that, then they start looking for resources, whether it's your company or me as a coach or whatever it might be, internally or externally.
So excuse me, Richard, you said something when we met, one of the times that we met, that I believe is really, really important. You hear people say it, you hear business owners talk about it, but they never do it, or rarely do they ever do it. And that is, are you working in your business or on your business?
Yes. As an example, I think you and I touched on that during that conversation. I mean, I have a client who is like one of the best examples that was down in the weeds working in the business rather than on the business. And I'll clarify that in a minute. And she had been in business 13 or 14 years. And by getting out of the weeds, by working more on the business, after 13, 14 years, she was able to grow her revenue 70% in 6 months. So if you did the chart, it's like growing slightly, and then all of a sudden a hockey stick almost. So in the business is what most business owners are doing, which means you're doing whatever is necessary, whatever comes along, and you're really reacting and not planning and strategizing and deloading your time to work more on the business, which would be strategy, key leadership in terms of sales and marketing to grow revenue, key financial management activities that are being ignored. So you're not really seeing how your profitability is growing. It's not just the top line of revenues, it's also the bottom line of net profit. So that's why the time needs to be recovered by working more on the business as the leader and the chief strategist of the business, as opposed to really just another higher paid employee who's doing all sorts of things that they really shouldn't be doing. And a quick example of that, I had a client who had multiple emergency medicine or type clinics where you go when you don't want to go to the hospital first. And he was a doctor, and he was doing a lot of the medical work in his clinics. And he thought, well, by me doing the work and being the labor, I'm saving all that money. And we said, well, why don't you go look and see what a resource would cost you? And he went out, and he had a friend he had worked with before in emergency medicine. And he could hire this guy for like $85 or $90 an hour. And he was working not all the time, but part-time. And I'm like, you don't think you're worth $85 an hour as the owner of the company? So when you get a sense of what the pay rate of what you're doing would be and what you should be making as the owner of the company, sometimes that creates a reality. They get a grip and go, yeah, you're right. I'm working in the business doing this but I could get someone to do it for $85 an hour. That's actually worth my time to do that.
Yeah, for sure. You've got to, most business owners that I've come across, and you may have had a different experience, Richard. They started. A lot of times it was them. I mean, they were the everything, and they added people as they went, but it's really difficult for them to let go. And in your example of somebody you could pay $85 an hour, that person probably can do it better than they can. But it's hard to get that business owner to let go. What are some of the strategies you use? Well, what are some of the strategies you use around that?
Well, let me start this. I would say to begin with that there are people who are workaholics. And if you take half of their work off the plate, come back next week, they've just reloaded themselves back up. So the first thing is to try to get the workaholic, which is the minority, I think. I think most people in today's environment, especially younger people, which I work a lot with in their 30s and 40s, they value work-life balance. Maybe people more in our age group are a little bit more of the, work ethic, we used to call it. And they don't mind working 50 hours a week, and maybe they don't have time with their family. So one thing is if I'm dealing with a workaholic, it takes multiple tries, where as we empty the bucket and they refill it after a couple of times, and they're refilling it with work that's not higher level, like strategy and leadership and key management of sales and marketing to drive revenue, then I have to get more serious with them and say, point out what they're doing. And that's the value of a coach. Is a lot of people say you'll never see yourself the way other people see you. Right? Do you agree with that? Yeah.
Sure.
So the coach has to reflect back to the person. Here's a behavior that you seem to have that's counterproductive. And if the person truly understands that, then logically they can get a hold of that. The flip side would be the person who maybe just does it out of habit. And my favorite quote from that is, I had a client one time as a workaholic and had two small kids under 10 years old. And he really was. He said, every night I get home at 8:30 and I collapse on the sofa. Now imagine if you're a business owner doing that regularly and you have two small kids, that means that's putting everything onto the wife, and he's having no quality time with his kids. So my question to him was, if you go home tonight and your wife left you a note that she's packed up and left with the kids and she wants a divorce, how would that feel? You
Yeah,
have sometimes you
and I'm smiling, but that's not
it's
funny.
no, it's not. It's terrible. And if you valued your family, then that would get your attention. So I think Stephen Covey, maybe, I believe he's the guy in one of his books who mentioned the fact of sometimes you have to give people a significant emotional event. Either they have to experience it naturally or you have to impose it upon them to get their attention.
Yeah, I think a good example, and I didn't think about this until you were talking, but my son-in-law is in that late 30, early 40 range, and he does very, very well in a business that he owns and does most of the sales for. Uh, but he would never, I don't believe he would ever work 60 hours a week. And he does really well not working 60 hours a week. He's got 3 young kids and he enjoys them.
Yeah. Well, I read a book about 15, 20 years ago, probably 20 when it came out. It was called The 4-Hour Work Week. It was very popular. It was a
Yeah.
bestseller. And basically, the premise of his book is you should find a way to get yourself in a position where you only work 4 hours a week. And that's your goal. And you work toward that. Now, a person who's working 60 hours a week, I would say, okay, let's get you down to 40. And then if that works and it's stable, then maybe we can get you down to 30. And then you will decide at 30, I can't work less than this. I feel too guilty to do it. Or, yeah, let's work on getting me down to 20. I've never had a client get down to 4, but I have had clients start at 60 and get down to 30 and getting all the work done they need, not just getting rid of work, but doing the critical working on the business.
A story came to mind, Richard, for me when you were sharing that. And I believe there's some truth in this story. I was a plumber's assistant when I was in college one summer, and I worked for a master plumber who was he was the plumber that always got the toughest job because he was the best plumber in the company. And we were working on a job one day, and he could see the owner walking up onto the job from the street. Yeah. And he gave out this big sign. He said, all right, I'm going to warn you what's going to happen. He's going to tell us that we're not doing this right. He's going to tell us exactly how we should have done it 15 years ago, which would have been right. It's a lot easier today than that. So I'm going to tell him, yes, sir. And then we're going to do it the way I told you we were going to do it.
There you go. Well, like that doctor, imagine if that doctor has to keep up with every medical development and new thing, and he doesn't have anyone to check against like the person he employs, then he's literally becoming the highest skilled laborer in his company rather than a highly paid owner who's running the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So some owners, as you said, don't keep up and they think they know, but what's the odds that they know AI as well as an AI specialist, or they know marketing or engineering or product development or whatever as the person doing the job? If they know it better than them, then they don't have a very highly performing employee in most cases.
If they don't know it better than them, they haven't made a good hire.
Yes, exactly.
So Richard, let's talk about growing your business. Like the woman you told us about grew her business 70% in what was it, 6 months?
Yeah.
Which that there's obviously some secrets to doing that. And I'd like you to address this too when we talk about it.
Okay.
And I think people get this confused, and that's the difference in strategy and tactics.
Yeah, so you might say a business owner who is working too much in the business is being more tactical and less strategic. Uh, and so, some things you can give someone a cookbook and they can go do it themselves. And I can see, I'll suggest some things on here and people can take that and probably apply it. And I hope they, can improve themselves in the operation of their business. But if you have an expert who understands the strategy and how to implement the cookbook, you're always going to get a better output. So, talking about a few things that might be useful to people that watch this podcast, the most basic thing I have ever done with clients, with business owners, is say, let's get together here. Let's write down a list of everything you do typically during a month that absorbs a significant amount of your time. And I'm not talking about it takes 30 minutes once a month to go do X or Y or Z, but what do you do often? What is time consuming? And especially, and so and then some of my clients who are more, let's say, engineering analytical oriented, like me, uh, they will sit down and actually create an Excel spreadsheet. And in the first column, I call it responsibilities. What are you responsible for? I'm responsible for contacting the CPA and make sure that they produce that they get all the bookkeeping done so that they send us each month a result. They close the books every month or whatever you want to call it. So the business owner can do that, but that's a pretty low level function that certainly an admin or somebody could do. So what do you do regularly? And then roughly how much time does that absorb? That's the first column. Responsibilities. I'm responsible to do this. So then the next column, maybe one, would be your admin. What are the easy things I could hand off to my admin? That was an example. And then I've got a value beside that. That's that's 30 to 45 minutes a month because that is something I have to discuss with the CPA. So that's a low value activity, and it's also low time consumption. I had an owner who grew actually 400%. They were small business, so when you're small, 400%. But they went from 1 million to 5 million. Okay. And one of the first things they got off their list was they were doing the billing every month. And it took them maybe 3 to 4 days every month to go through the billing because they had a very somewhat complex billing approach, which involved monthly subscribers and special projects that were one-offs and things like that. When they went and got that off they gained 3 or 4 days in their month. They gained 4 days. That's 1 day a week, getting rid of one thing. And so your admin might be the next column. Maybe you have 1 or 2 managers. Some small businesses have managers. If you don't, you definitely have a lead in some department that could be doing what you're doing. And you put them out there and you sort of check them off in a time frame of when you want to hand those off. And I believe every business owner I work with can get rid of at least 50% of their work hours. And all they have to do is go through that process of deloading and delegating.
So let me ask you this, Richard, and this is what we talk about here in bridging generations, bridging that gap, how they're different. So I used my son-in-law earlier as an example, and let's take an old guy like me who, excuse me, whose work I enjoy doing. It's important to me. I can put, 8 hours a day into it. I mean, I could put 12 hours a day into it if I wanted to. How do you get owners to understand? Just take my son-in-law and I. how for me to understand with him, it's fine. Him working 8 hours a day is great, and having a great family life is great. For me,
Well,
working 12 hours a day may be what I want to do. How do you deal with that difference?
well, I think one of the things, this is sort of touching on HR management, and also most of the small companies I work with do not have a $90 to $120,000 professional HR manager. So
Sure.
what does that mean? That means usually either they've delegated it to a person who's marginally competent, or they have it on their own plate. So certainly a thing to get rid of. And there are HR outsourced management companies that I would recommend people look at. So the fundamental of what you're talking about, as you said, bridging generations or understanding generations, is,
Exactly.
the fact that, and this is fundamental to that, I believe, which is you need to understand the motivations of your employees. So what do they value? A younger person, if they value work-life balance, if they value as much vacation as possible, if they value taking all of their days that they're allotted and not missing any of them and not wanting to work on those days and things like that, then you have to be sensitive to the fact that their values are different. And the way to do that is make sure you understand what do they value. And that is really a HR becoming sensitive to the needs and desires of the employee. Not many small business owners are skilled at that, or they fail to do it. And the best way to do that, if you have long-term employees, is in an annual review. We call those performance reviews, but really that can also be where you get at what drives this person. What do they value and not value? And if they value, imagine your son, imagine he was in marketing, and you drove him and you motivated him to look into how can AI make more effective marketing. He might be able to do more in 30 hours and not be even maybe really punching the clock 40 hours a week, and get a lot more done if you, as the leader and the visionary and the strategist of the company, led them to how can we make your job more effective and more efficient. Then you're leading them toward, I'm not saying you let everybody work 30 hours, but I would rather him work 30 hours, be even more happy working for you and your business and getting more done because he's more efficient and effective and knowledgeable.
So what are the communicate what you just said is great, and I agree with you 100%. But how do you get business owners to understand that?
Well, that's part of coaching. I have had other discussions like this before, and when we get to this point, what really comes to my mind is, at least in the beginning, when you have conversations with people, you sort of have to dumb down your message to some extent. So I would say, right? I mean, you don't go right down into the depth of.
Sure.
So when I
Scare them to
approach
death.
them, when I approach someone, I say, I'm a small business coach. I don't just do coaching, but that keeps it simple because they kind of maybe have a vision of what a coach does. But I'm a coach, I'm an educator or trainer, and I'm a motivator. So I have to motivate people to believe, yeah, I've got a $1 million company, but I could be $5 million. I have to motivate people to believe I could grow 70% in 6 months. And I'd say one of the failures of business owners is it's hard to motivate. You may have to motivate yourself to work longer hours. You may motivate yourself to get certain basic things done and off your plate. But I think most people underestimate the opportunity they have to make their life, their work-life balance better themselves, and to be more effective and what those results can look like. So I believe you got motivation, vision, the ability to envision what can be. I hope I don't sound like a former political person here, but envision what can be, number one. Secondly, educate them in areas they're not as strong in, and then strategize and coach to get the actual things fleshed out with a plan and hold them accountable to move forward in that plan. Because one of the things we haven't talked about is accountability. I mean, it's hard to be self-accountable. My feeling is very few people do a good job of that. So I'm here every month or every week or whatever it is, and they need a source of that. So I would recommend all small business owners look at business coaching or some kind of mentor. And if they think they're going to get it for free once every couple of months from a friend by going to lunch with them, it's just not consistent enough input and coaching, in my opinion. Did that answer your question? Or
yeah, it did. And from what you've said, I would guess that pardon me, I would guess that understanding what you just talked about, understanding that if they're working 50 hours a week, it's possible to work 30.
yes,
You may not want to, but it's possible.
that's a good example. That's the vision. You have to give them the vision that this is possible, because they may be thinking I can't work less because it's going to affect the business.
Right. And do you think so say that you have your first interview with a guy or a gal,
Yeah.
and they're working they're working 60 hours a week, they're doing $1 million in revenue, but they're always chasing the next they're always putting out the next fire. What's the game where the things pop up and you knock one down and another one pops up? Playing that game. How do you get them to begin to think the way you're talking about what is possible from where they are?
Well, one thing is to give them examples, like I just did, that I've seen this is possible and I believe it's possible. And the biggest thing a person has to have is the desire. I can't make someone desire to go from 60 to 30. So if they have a desire, sometimes when people have a desire, but it's just sort of a theoretical desire or an intangible desire, I'm sure you've heard this before, you have to make it more tangible. So then you go, well, if you were only working 30 hours a week and your company was growing and you were completely happy with it, what would you do with those extra hours? So now you're helping them understand the ROI or the payback. Well, I would go to all of my kids' soccer games. I would take more vacation, at least long weekends or something like that. So they start thinking about their work-life balance. And even though, you said earlier, Butch, about people like us might be okay or happy working 50 or 60 hours a week. At some point you get to the point where you realize I'm not going to live forever. And maybe I should spend a little more time enjoying my life, because as they said, nobody ever lay on their deathbed and said, I wish I'd gone to the office and worked more.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I want to be clear. I didn't say I wanted to work 50 or 60 hours a week. I just said there's some people who might want to do that.
Yes.
So, Richard, what do you believe is the biggest aha you get when you work with business owners? The fact that they could be working less?
I think that's one of them. The other aha is they get a grip on the reality of how their business is actually doing, regardless of how many hours they're working. You know, you have these categories of how you might analyze them. Because I come from an engineering background, I kind of have, as you said, I'm a different animal. I believe first you have to kind of motivate and give the vision, and then you have to see, is there the desire? If there's the desire, then they have to understand, how could I get there? And that gets more into the, it takes analytical sort of problem solving and planning and strategy. And then you need to look at, okay, how do I implement that? And how do I hold myself accountable? And how do I stay motivated? So, you know, I think there's the looking at yourself and what it's doing to you as the owner and what you're getting out of it. And then looking at the business and saying, I meet all sorts of small business owners, whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4, $5 million. And if you look at the graph of their revenue, it's not exactly going up like a hockey stick. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's kind of flat or very slow growth. And if you look at the bottom line profitability, many times over time, the revenue may be going up, but the profitability really isn't going up. It's almost flat. So growth doesn't mean you're getting more out of your work. It just means you're getting more dollars in the front end, but what's coming out the back end when you balance out the expenses and income every month. So I think that gets back to the financial management. Sometimes more people get a grip of their finances. What is the business actually doing? That's another aha moment.
Yeah, I have a friend who says the only thing working hard will do is make you tired.
Well, there's lots of phrases, and you and I, I'm sure, picked up tons of them during our lifetimes. And when these phrases come to you, then hopefully that generates a little bit of a perspective on things. Like, nobody ever laid on their deathbed and said, I wish I'd worked more. So sometimes when you can come up with that phrase, it triggers the person to stop for a moment and think about where they are.
Hey, so Frank, thank you for being on the watching today. And so Frank's question, Richard, is you're identifying working smart, not hard, or accountability. Do you have 4 or 5 point checklist to help clients stay on track daily?
Well, I wish it was that simple. No, I do not have one. I had I'm going to lunch later today and meet someone who I've sent some clients to. And I have an appreciation, I think, more for what they do than what I do. So what I'm going to bring with them is I've whited out all the names and anything that would be, you would know who the client was. But I'm going to give them this 3 pages of notes of the last time I talked to my client. So Frank, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. I think the experience, if you're a business owner, or you know business owners, of doing what I said earlier in the podcast, of coming up with a list of responsibilities and who you could hand those off to get you to work more on the business than in, but getting directly to your idea of a checklist. An example this brings to mind, and this is not my experience, but someone related to me. They said, when I was growing up, my dad ran a shop, a repair shop for cars. And he had a little slip, like a Post-it note, on his desk. And every day his admin would bring him the Post-it note, and on it, it told him how we're doing on a particular metric of the business. Revenue, revenue, profitability, maybe accounts receivable, days outstanding, something that 4 or 5 metrics, typically financial, that would. So I would say if you had to have 4 or 5 things to keep on your desk daily, it's really more about measurements and metrics, which I could talk for the next 45 minutes on. People talk about the ABCs of financials. I actually have a list of A to Z. So I've got another 23 in addition to the ABCs. I've got all the way to a Z financial analysis thing metric that someone might be measuring. So I guess my answer to Frank would be figure out at least 2 or 3 financial metrics that you'd want to monitor, and then 2 or 3. I would look at metrics. Are there maybe 2 operational metrics, 3 financial, 2 operational? If I was going to try to simplify it like this, that you would look at every day, or you would get once a week, that tell you how you've done. And of course, one of them could be forward looking, like what bookings do you have? What's on the books for future revenue? I hope that helps a little bit, but the world of having a coach who's going through 3 pages of activities and coming up with action items and due dates and holding you accountable it's a completely different world from a checklist. I mean, I have a list of things. I don't have it right in front of me, but I have a to-do list, but it's got 8 or 10 things, and some of them may not get it done for the next 10 or 20 days. So the daily would be more what I suggested.
Okay. Well,
I hope that's helpful.
Richard, I really appreciate you being on the show today. It was great information that you shared. If somebody watching wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way?
They can email me. I've had, since I started coaching 20-something years ago and was first working with executives and leaders and C-suite people on being more effective in their roles, I came up with a Gmail address, executiveImpact@gmail.com, which I think is scrolling across the bottom of the screen. That's the easiest way to get me. Okay. My phone number is 770-366-5875. If they wanted to text or call me, those would be the easiest ways. And of course, on LinkedIn, I'm sure Frank and everybody is on LinkedIn, and you could just message me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find.
Okay, well, that's great. Again, Richard, appreciate you being on the show today. It was great information that you shared. One of the things I want to emphasize as we close, once again, I want to thank Fist Bump for them producing the show today. And then I also want to remind, if you're watching, I want you to remember this. This isn't about starting over, especially if you're older. This is about evolving, and it's new wisdom. It's same wisdom, new tools.
Yeah, really what we're talking about is evolving from being more of a worker bee with a little bit of strategic thinking and implementation of those strategies, to moving more toward being the leader and the motivator and the strategist and even the promoter of the business, which I know is one thing you get involved with, Butch, is that idea of it's not enough just to manage the company. You need to be really the sales and marketing leader, not necessarily the doer, depending upon what resources you have. You need to be the leader to drive the revenue and profit.
Well said. So remember, this isn't about starting over. It's about evolving. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for everybody that was watching. Thanks for your question, Frank. And we'll be back here next week, 10 o'clock on Friday.
Thanks, Butch. Appreciate it.